Am I okay to use this one? Yep, great. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I feel like a teacher now. Good morning. It's really good to be here. The good thing for me about going last is that I can kind of sum up everybody else's points. But the bad thing is that a lot of these points have already been made and a lot better than I can make them. I particularly found yesterday Jonathan's talk really fascinating because he made a point that I'm also very passionate about, that history does not just move in one direction, somebody who also studied history. And Jonathan spoke about how the sexual revolution is a very recent thing, and this is true of abortion, or legal abortion certainly specifically. When I spoke for this conference 2 years ago, I spoke on the history of the abortion law, and starting in the 18th century BC, I ran through the ways in which the unborn child has been protected by law since ancient times. So my overall case was that compared to the vast sweep of human history, this last century or so of legalised abortion, lesser than that in the UK, is an historical aberration. And I made this point that history does not move in one direction. So a lot of people will say that history is kind of moving, getting more and more progressive. We'd probably be more inclined to say it's getting worse and worse. But I'd say that neither is true. History is circular. Evil things come around again and again, and they can also be defeated again. So I wanted to make that point today because, to be honest, this idea that things are getting worse and worse doesn't seem that far off the mark at the moment, does it? We're undoubtedly in one of the worst places that the pro-life movement has been in a very long time, maybe ever. In the space of 1 week in June, just a few months ago, MPs voted to legalise self-induced abortions up to birth and to legalise assisted suicide. And this wasn't part of that kind of week from hell, as I call it, but the month before, on the 13th of May, MSPs in Scotland voted by 70 to 56 in favour of their own assisted dying bill. So the fight is far from over on these pieces of legislation, and I'll come back to that. But I think we do first have to acknowledge the gravity of those votes. It is horrifying and it's heartbreaking that MPs, the people elected to represent us in Parliament, voted for the extreme and barbaric proposal of letting babies be killed up to birth by their own mothers. And we already have very liberal abortion laws, as we know. An estimated 300,000 babies a year are killed by abortion. And now even the very limited protection offered to babies by the law is being stripped away by MPs who seem to have no compassion for babies in the womb, even those who were about to be born. And it wasn't even close. That amendment passed by 379 votes to 137. In the case of assisted suicide, that vote was at least close. It passed with a reduced majority of 23. And I think there the disappointment with MPs was not so much the kind of callousness, but it was the inability of them to properly examine the proposal and to think about the consequences for vulnerable people. It was all just emotion and sound bites. Even in 2015, when the subject was last voted on in the Commons, I remember the quality of debate was much higher. So what can we do when Parliament and culture seem so against us? Do we kind of hunker down and wait for better days? Do we switch our attention to other things? I actually received a letter a few weeks ago. I think somebody had got one of our packs in their church or something. And this person said that our attempts to change government policy are now redundant and we should pursue other lines of action. I was thinking, this is like, dear Miss Campaigner, please stop all campaigning. It didn't go down particularly well. And one of the points there was essentially convert everyone to Christianity, which I'm not sure is an easier task than fighting abortion, but there we go. Hopefully the fact that you're all here means that you do believe there is still value in pro-life campaigning, but it is natural to feel downhearted after the defeats we've suffered recently. So today I want to talk about, the theme of this conference, how we fight back. First, in the short term, how do we respond to these immediate legislative, I hate that word, threats? And secondly, how we respond to these defeats in a broader way to create a real movement for change. And most of our speakers have already been talking to that point on how we fight back. But perhaps what I can add is, my political geekery, as we put it, the details of the exact challenges we're facing and the practical steps that you can take to help. So let's start with the decriminalisation amendment. On the 17th of June this year, MPs voted to expand our already horrific abortion laws by tabling amendments to the government's crime and policing bill. So we had new clause 1, which was tabled by Tonya Antonazi MP, a Labour MP, who actually is also a sponsor of the assisted dying bill, so she's clearly quite into killing people. So this amendment seeks to change the law so that no offence is committed by a woman in relation to her own pregnancy at any gestation. So this means that a woman who induced her abortion at home using pills or any other method you can think of at any stage of pregnancy, including just before natural birth, would not commit a crime. So this amendment was debated for less than 2 hours, and the House of Commons again did not cover itself in glory. Tonya Antonazi began her speech by referring to the story of a woman called Nicola Packer, who was charged with carrying out an illegal late-term abortion that went to court. And I have to say, I found it quite surprising that the abortion lobby used this story. They've used, objectively, I think, more sympathetic ones in the past. So this case, Miss Packer was 40 years old at the time, so it's not like she was a kind of a scared teenager. And she was in a relationship with a married couple. Though the wife was under the impression that pregnancy wasn't an option, to say no more. So it's not the most obviously sympathetic case, but these MPs were standing up and saying, "Oh, isn't it awful that she had to go through court?" And and there was a dead baby there, a 26-week dead baby, and yeah. I mean, I don't think public opinion was really in favour of expanding our abortion laws for a woman in a threesome, but there we go. So there were also MPs who just really didn't seem to understand what they were voting for. There was one MP called Catherine Fuchs who intervened on a pro-life MP to say, "There's nothing in new clause 1 that refers to abortion until term. There would be no change to the abortion law, absolutely no change at all. We are not saying aborted to term, and it's extremely harmful for her to say that." But it says exactly that, well, I'll come to it. I mean, Charles, this same MP was also telling off Danny Kruger for using the word suicide in the assisted suicide debate. So it's just the kind of quality that we're looking at here. So the vote took place. It was approved, as I say, by 379 votes to 137. There was an even more extreme amendment, if you can believe it, tabled by Stella Creasy, that was not voted on. And at the end of the debate, Jerome Mayhew MP summed up the situation well when he said, "Irrespective of our position on the votes that we have just taken, we have to acknowledge that we have made a major change to abortion law, yet that was on the basis of no evidence sessions, no committee stage scrutiny, and just 46 minutes of backbench debate and a winding up speech by a minister who refused to take any interventions when the chamber was full of one-line debates." So let's just look at the wording of the clause. The wording of the clause it's quite short: removal of women from the criminal law related to abortion. For the purposes of sections 58 and 59 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 and the Infant Life Preservation Act 1929, no offence is committed by a woman acting in relation to her own pregnancy. And Tonya Antonazi gave an explanatory statement, so just explaining what she means by this. This new clause would disapply existing criminal law related to abortion from women acting in relation to their own pregnancy at any gestation, removing the threat of investigation, arrest, prosecution, or imprisonment. It would not change any law regarding the provision of abortion services within a healthcare setting, including but not limited to the time limit, telemedicine, the grounds for abortion, or the requirement for 2 doctors' approval. So does this really mean abortion up to birth? So people have been questioning this, that MP I mentioned and other people. I think people just can't believe it. So let's just break it down, what this means. The sections of the Offences Against the Person Act and the Infant Life Preservation Act that this clause refers to, they form the legal underpinning of the current abortion law. So the 1967 Abortion Act sets out when doctors can lawfully perform abortions within this framework. Those laws still apply. Removing those offences for women, so she's gone with just for women, not for men, I guess, would therefore remove any legal restrictions on women regarding abortion. So the 67 Abortion Act doesn't really, it's kind of redundant if those bits of law underpinning it don't apply to women. So a woman could abort for any reason, including, say, the sex of the baby. And as the explanatory statement itself says, this applies to pregnancy at any gestation. It's explicit about that. So it therefore definitely does legalise abortion up to birth if it is induced by the woman herself. So they're right to say it does not change the legal limits for accessing an abortion in a clinic. So if you go into an abortion clinic, the limit will still be 24 weeks. But But it clearly is massively changing the law to the effect that it will not be unlawful for a woman to abort her own pregnancy at any point. And this is especially concerning because that's something that's now easy to do since the change in the law in 2020, allowing women to be sent abortion pills in the post to self-administer at home. These pills by post abortions are now the most common method of abortion, accounting for 61% of all abortions in 2022. 2022 is the last year we have statistics for because for some reason the government is now years behind in releasing them. So I'm sure it's much higher than that now. And a number of distressing cases which actually sparked the calls for decriminalisation involved women obtaining the abortion drugs in this way and taking them much later in pregnancy. So there's this Nicola Packer's case I referred to. You may have heard of the Carla Foster case a year or two before. And that this amendment will allow self-induced abortions up to birth was confirmed by a legal opinion given by Stephen Rose KC, a leading criminal barrister. In his legal opinion, Mr. Rose said that the amendment would mean that it would no longer be illegal for a woman to carry out her own abortion at home for any reason at any gestation up to birth. And that last bit is a direct quote. So we really can't overestimate how serious this is. And it could get even worse. So it's clearly a mad situation to allow abortion from 24 weeks up to birth if it's a woman self-inducing it herself at home, but not in a clinic or hospital. So I think inevitably what's going to happen is there will be horrific cases of women being injured or, God forbid, even dying from trying this at home. And then the other side will go, oh, gosh, this is terrible. We must do it more safely in a clinic, hospital. So we can be sure that the other side will use this to push for abortion up to birth across the board. So what happens next? So the Crime and Policing Bill has now passed to the House of Lords for debate and scrutiny. As new Clause 1 was incorporated into the bill, the clause on decriminalising abortion is now new Clause 191 of the Crime and Policing Bill. I know these numbers just jump around all over the place, and I'm sorry, but it's not my fault. It's just what happens. So there will be opportunities for peers to debate Clause 191 and to suggest changes to it. So you can table amendments to an amendment, as it were, or they could even reject it altogether. The bill comes up for its second reading in the House of Lords on Thursday, the 16th of October, so less than a month away. Second reading is just a debate, so any chance for changing things will be at the committee stage when the bill is examined in detail. We do now have the order from the government in which the bill is to be debated, and Clause 191 is to be expected to be debated on the very final day of committee. And we don't have a specific date for that yet. It could be quite a while later, which is actually quite good for us, because obviously I've been getting you all to focus on the assisted suicide bill, and we'll continue to do that, but we might be able to kind of pivot away for a bit to the decriminalisation amendment. So we are working with members of the House of Lords to try and make changes, to try and table amendments. But what we need you to do is to be writing to members of the House of Lords and asking them to fight this extreme abortion up to birth amendment. And we have to remember this wasn't in any party's manifesto. It was passed after just 43 minutes of backbench debate with very little notice. I think it was about 2 weeks' notice, if that, and people just didn't really notice it was happening. And the Lords can fight back, and they must fight back. Many of you have already been writing to Lords on the assisted suicide bill, which is wonderful. So now you can use those skills to write to them on this issue. And I will later on run through how practically you write to Lords. So let's move on to the assisted suicide bill. This is something that's changing almost in real time, as the Lords were debating it on Friday as we were all gathering. You might have noticed me kind of sat in a corner, just kind of headphones in, watching the debate, dashing off emails. So this has been a long campaign, so I've just kind of put all of the dates there just to remind us of what's been happening. So it was in November that MPs first voted by 330 to 275 to give the bill a second reading. The bill was then examined by a committee of MPs where it was substantially amended, and it was a complete shambles of a process. I could go on and on about that, but there we go. And then it was debated at report stage by MPs. And then on the 20th of June, MPs voted by 314 to 291 to pass the bill to the House of Lords by a reduced majority of 23. So it was obviously very disappointing that the bill wasn't voted down in June, well, or indeed in November. Everyone worked really hard to achieve that. I mean, I know all of you, our supporters, were really working hard, lobbying your MPs. Everyone across all the other pro-life groups were as well, and anti-assisted suicide groups. There's been really good kind of collaboration across groups. So everyone really put their all into this. So it was devastating to just fall short. But there are some positives we can take away from that vote in June. The number of MPs supporting the bill fell between second and third reading, and that's actually pretty much unheard of. The proper debate normally occurs at second reading, and third reading is just a formality. They've normally kind of worked it all out by then. So this time the debate was actually taken very seriously, and the numbers actually fell. Crucially, it did not receive an absolute majority in the House of Commons, which is useful to bear in mind when writing to peers. So it's now in the House of Lords. The first day of debate at second reading was last Friday, the 12th of September. It's being spearheaded in the Lords by Lord Falconer of Thorrington. So I actually found the quality of the debate in the Lords very encouraging, especially compared to the Commons, as well as the fact that peers stood up to oppose the bill by about 2-1. I wasn't expecting that at all, to be honest, because in the past the Lords have actually been slightly worse on assisted suicide than the Commons, but they seem to have completely switched around. The first day of debate showed clearly that the bill will not just receive a quick rubber stamping in the Lords, and a large majority of speakers expressed concerns or outright opposed the bill. So on the first day, last Friday, it was something like 28 peers spoke in support of the bill, with 60 against, and about 3 didn't give a clear indication of what side they came down on. So there were some very strong speeches on our side. Former Prime Minister Theresa May made a very strong speech. Let's see if the video will work.
And I say that I recognise that across this House there will be very firmly held views on both sides of this argument, some coming from real personal experience, as we heard from my noble friend Lord Forsyth. But, my Lords, I oppose this bill, and I wish to set out my main reasons. First, I do not believe that the safeguards in this bill will prevent people from being pressurised to end their lives, sometimes for the benefit of others. I also worry that, as we have seen in countries where there is such a law, that people will feel that they must end their lives simply because they feel they are a burden on others. I worry about the impact it will have on people with disabilities, with chronic illness, with mental health problems, because there is a risk that legalising assisted dying reinforces the dangerous notion that some lives are less worth living than others. And again, as we have seen in other countries, once a law like this is passed, the pressure then grows to extend the scope of it. I also oppose it because I believe that in the absence of by disapplying the default of a coroner's report, there is a danger that this could be used as a cover-up. A cover-up for mistakes made in hospital, or for perhaps a hospital-acquired illness, infection, which has led to an increased likelihood of death. I have a friend who calls it the licence to kill bill. And finally, my Lords, this is not an assisted dying bill, it is an assisted suicide bill. As a society, we believe that suicide is wrong. The government has a national suicide prevention strategy. We bemoan the number of young people who are lured into committing suicide by social media and what they read on the internet. This week is World Suicide Awareness Week. Suicide is wrong, but this bill effectively says suicide is okay. What message does that give to our society? Suicide is not okay. Suicide is wrong. This bill is wrong. And in my opinion, it should not pass.
There we go. Pretty barnstorming, eh? If only she'd been like that while in government. Yeah, and she wasn't the only one to refer to the fact that it was Suicide Prevention Week last week when they were making these speeches. You know, the irony is just exquisite. And there were a number of other really good speeches. Baroness Monckton of Dallington Forest spoke of her fears for people with learning difficulties, such as her daughter, Domenica, who has Down syndrome. And she condemned the campaign group My Death, My Decision, who are like the even more extreme version of Dignity in Dying, who sent a pamphlet to peers urging that no provisions be made for families to interfere with someone's decision to seek death. And there were other moving personal testimonies, including Lord Polack, who was given 6 months to live 37 years ago, and Baroness Prentice, who spoke how her recent experience of being diagnosed with aggressive cancer has made her fear being a burden, despite being very privileged in many ways. And on the subject of privilege, I was struck by how many of those speaking in support of the bill really failed to understand the reality of many people's lives. Lord Dobbs was totally incredulous of the idea that families might coerce their relatives into choosing death. He was like, oh yeah, do you really think we're going to be a nation of granny killers now? And it's like, do you not know what happens in, you know? And quite a few argued that it should pass because it's what I'd want for myself. And it's like, yeah, but you're supposed to be legislators. You're supposed to think about how it would affect other people. And then others gave away the true agenda of the pro-assisted suicide lobby, with Baroness Murphy bemoaning that the bill has too many safeguards and calling for the eligibility criteria to be expanded. So that's her now. Let's see if we can watch it.
The bill is very narrow in its criteria for eligibility. And although I'm content to go through with this bill as it is, I'm one who would like to see in the future an expansion of the eligibility criteria to support people with irremediable diagnoses such as Tony Nicholson and other people with locked-in syndrome.
Anyway, she does want to expand it, and that's significant because certainly Kim Leadbeater in the Commons was saying nonsensically that once it's passed, you can't change it. You can't change it in any way. It's like, of course you can. Parliament can change anything at once. And, you know, several people have been saying that they actually do want to see it expanded. So Friday, the day before yesterday, we had the second day of debate. So many peers had put their names down to speak that a second day of debate was granted, which was unusual. And while this was good that we had the more debate, the government very unusually planned this debate for a day which was supposed to be in the parliamentary recess. So normally, Parliament is only recalled from recess basically if there's a national emergency, like the collapse of British Steel or whatever it was, I think was the last one. Because this was so last minute, lots of peers would already have made plans to be somewhere else, particularly as it's party conference season. And because the rule in the Lords is that you have to be present for both days of debates if you want to speak, those who weren't able to be there on one day wouldn't be able to speak at all. So people have pointed out that this does seem to be the government showing the bill kind of rather preferential treatment to get it through. Anyway, the debate happened. I wasn't able to watch it all because I was travelling here, but I had colleagues watching it. But the story was actually broadly the same, about twice as many peers speaking on our side. Again, some very good speeches and some very bad ones. And I'm just going to share one more because it was so bizarre and it ties to some of the other issues we were talking about.
That's a minor change compared with this century's growth in the world population from 6.1 billion to 8.2 billion. A 25% increase in 25 years. But just think what the 2025 numbers would be if abortion had not been legalized, or there had not been wide-scale usage and advocacy of contraception. And indeed, the growth of homosexuality throughout society has reduced the number of children we would have had the churches had their way. We would have had a very much bigger population than we presently have, facing the difficulties we have with climate change.
Yeah, so there we go. I hope you all enjoyed that. So so I think that's what we call saying the quiet part out loud, you know? And that has got quite a lot of... he's called Lord Brooke. I hadn't come across him before. So, yeah, it's not just assisted dying that's going to reduce the population, you know, abortion, contraception. I've never heard it as an argument for homosexuality before, but, you know, I guess it's probably broadly true. Anyway, so what actually happened at the end of the debate? So you'll probably have seen that the bill did pass its second reading in the Lords. So, of course, the other side is spinning that as a victory. They're saying, you know, peers have approved it, but they haven't. They're lying. So the important context is that by convention, Lords very rarely vote at second reading. To be honest, it's not a convention I understand, because apparently there's nothing stopping them voting at second reading, but they've decided that they don't. So this doesn't mean that they support it. It just means that the debate is continuing. and it doesn't stop them amending it or rejecting it later. And actually another development is that an amendment tabled by Labour peer Baroness Berger, she set up a separate select committee to hear evidence from experts, and that's been approved, again without a vote. This is good news because we know that the more scrutiny this bill receives, the more uncomfortable people get with it. Across the 2 days of debate, it's been striking just how many peers found problems with the provisions in the bill, even if they were sympathetic to the principle. And it's also striking that the proponents of the bill, led by Lord Falconer, felt forced to compromise and agree to Baroness Berger's select committee. At the beginning of the week, I saw an email that Dignity in Dying was sending out, slamming this amendment as a wrecking amendment and telling their people to write to peers and oppose it. One does wonder why they're reluctant to hear from experts in the field. So the fact that Falconer had to compromise and work with Baroness Berger and pass this amendment is significant. And another sign that the bill's proponents are feeling nervous is that Lord Forsyth, who's a supporter of assisted suicide, he's tabled his own bills before, he withdrew his amendment that would have granted government time to the bill. So he must have seen that that wasn't going to pass with the mood of the House. So you're probably wondering if the Lords actually have the power to reject the bill. People on the other side of the debate have been saying that Lords cannot reject the democratic will of the Commons, or that their only role is to amend and revise. However, we do need to look at who is saying this. So a key figure is Lord Falconer himself, the one who's putting the bill through the Lords, and he wrote a whole piece for the Times saying, "The Lords will scrutinise and improve, but it will respect and give effect to that decision." But as I say, he is an avid assisted suicide campaigner. He's sponsoring the bill. He's tried to ram it through Parliament, 7 times. This is his 8th attempt. And actually, he's not usually of the view that the Lords has to be so deferential to the Commons. So back in October 2011, he was one of 220 peers who tried to vote down the Coalition's Health and Social Care Bill, despite it having been passed by a majority of 65 in the Commons. And he's tried to delay Tory changes to tax credits, a number of things like that. And actually, these were all government bills in which there are some conventions preventing Lords from stopping them. And that doesn't apply to a private member's bill like this. So under the UK Constitution, legislation must be passed by both the House of Commons and the House of Lords before it can receive royal assent. Only in limited and specific circumstances can the Commons bypass the Lords, and these don't really apply to this bill, as I'll come on to. So a professor of public law from Cambridge, Professor Mark Elliott, he argues that the House of Lords has the constitutional authority not just to amend the bill, but to reject it outright. He says the United Kingdom's constitution is founded ultimately on the sovereignty of Parliament, not the sovereignty of the House of Commons alone. There is something that you might have seen floating around called the Salisbury-Addiston Convention. So this is a convention that Lords do not block government bills that give effect to commitments in a governing party's election manifesto. So that's actually quite narrow, and neither of those things apply to a private member's bill like this. And you might say, if you know about this stuff, what about the Parliament Act? So that's, again, a way to try and get things through without approval of the Lords. So this allows the House of Commons to send a bill for royal assent without Lords' approval if the same bill is passed by MPs in 2 consecutive parliamentary sessions. So in practice, that means that Lords can delay legislation for a year. However, for this process to apply, the bill must be introduced without any changes. So because of these conditions, I've said it's rare for this to happen to a private member's bill. In fact, I think it's never happened with a private member's bill. Because if you remember the process of the private member's bill, somebody has to get high up in the ballot and introduce it. So it would require somebody else getting high enough up in this random ballot who actually wants to introduce assisted suicide, and they wouldn't be able to change it, which they clearly need to. So basically, I don't think it's much of a worry. And a number of influential bodies have confirmed in the last few weeks that the Lords can indeed block the bill. The Hansard Society, which has actually done some very helpful briefings. If you're as geeky as me and want to know all about the parliamentary process, I'd recommend them. But they said the House of Lords has the authority to reject, delay, or otherwise block the assisted dying bill, though they do question whether it would be politically prudent to do so. And the Committee on the Constitution says, and I'll read this out because I think it's very definitive. There has been some debate as to the role of the House of Lords in scrutinising this bill, especially over whether it is appropriate for the House to debate the principle of assisted dying, which has now been accepted by the Commons. As the bill is not a government bill, the Salisbury-Addiston Convention does not apply. I've been trying to summarise, that doesn't work, which is that the bills foreshadowed in the government's manifesto are given a second reading in the Lords are not subject to wrecking amendments in a past and reasonable time does not apply. Therefore, there is no reason for the usual scrutiny role of the House to be constrained. We have previously concluded that the two houses have different complementary roles which contribute to the overall effectiveness of the legislative process. Given that this bill is a private member's bill and that it deals with a morally significant subject, close and detailed scrutiny by both houses is particularly important. And it concludes, the House of Lords plays an important role in the legislative process. It is constitutionally appropriate for the House to scrutinise the bill and, if so minded, vote to amend it or reject it. So I hope that clears up the idea that the Lords can't reject this bill. They absolutely can. And if any peers write back to you saying that, just forward it to me and I'll send you our briefing on this and you can go back to them. I know some supporters have done that. Though I have been encouraged that most peers don't actually seem to have been taken in by this idea that they can't oppose it. I noticed quite a few saying so during the course of the debate. So I know that many of you have already been writing to Lords, but for those of you who haven't, I'll just do a quick run through on how to do that. And this applies both to this bill, the Assisted Dying Suicide Bill, and the decriminalisation amendment. So just to have a quick run through of the House of Lords, for those of you not too familiar with it, it's the upper house of the British Parliament at Westminster. Unlike MPs who are elected, members of the House of Lords, also called peers, are appointed to the role for life. There are currently 827 peers, though it may have changed because they keep dying and being appointed and retiring, and it's very hard to keep track of. It's about that. So the House of Lords currently consists of the Lords Spiritual, which is 24 Church of England bishops, 85 hereditary peers, though they're about to be chucked out, but they're there at the moment, and the rest are peers nominated by the Prime Minister of the day under the Life Peerages Act of 1958. Peers come from all walks of life, and they may or may not have a political background. They chance at the moment, so many of them seem to be ex-MPs. I was watching the debate, I was like, oh, he's in the Lords now? She's in the Lords now? When did that happen? So as I've already explained, all legislation has to go through the Lords, so it's very important. So the question I get asked a lot is who do I write to? And I've had people get quite frustrated with me because I can't just give them a name. But unfortunately, there isn't really a straightforward answer. Unlike with MPs, there isn't like a Lord that represents you. They don't have constituencies, so there isn't one person I could tell you specifically to write to. So the bad news is that you do just have to do a bit more thinking and research on who to write to. But the good news is that you're not limited to only writing to your own MP as you are with MPs. You can write to as many as you like, or as many as you have the time and inclination to do. But I can give some suggestions on how to choose someone to write to. So as I say, do some research. Many will have their own website. You can also search Hansard, the record of parliamentary debates, online to see the issues that peers have spoken on. As I say, there do seem to be a lot of former MPs there. So if somebody who was your MP is now in the Lords, that might be a good reason. Just basically, when you write to them, if you can give some indication that you're writing to them particularly, so, dear so-and-so, as my former MP, I thought I would write to you about this, or as we're from the same part of the country, so yeah, location, you're going to find someone who lives vaguely near to you at least. Any kind of personal connection, if they attended your school, if they're from your hometown, work in the same field as you, just anything that makes it sound like the letter is addressed to them, not just completely, that it could be to anyone. Another option is many peers sit on select committees, so these are small groups of members who meet outside the chamber and are appointed to consider specific policy areas. You could say, I see that you're interested in justice, or I see that you're on the health committee. Or if you really can't be bothered to do any of that, you can just use our tool, which gives you a random peer. But because you're all committed people who come and spend a weekend at a conference, I'm sure you can put the hard work in. So just a few quick tips. Do use your own words. I mentioned this yesterday, but use your own concerns, use your own stories. It's so much more powerful than just regurgitating facts. You can, of course, use our briefings. That's what they're for, but write it out yourself. And it is obvious when people use templates. I know that people like templates because it's much easier, it's much quicker, but they can tell that you've just, pressed send on a template. And with all these things, the amount of effort you put in is the amount of effort you get out. And I did actually see a Lord, I think I sent that video around in the debate last week, specifically thank people for sending handwritten letters because I can see the effort that's gone into them. So they do see it. So express your own concerns and worries, and as I said, personalise it to the peer as much as you can. And don't email lots of lords at once, so that it will get blocked by the parliamentary system, basically. If more than 6 copies of the same email are received, the website says they will all be deleted. And anyway, it's far more effective to do personalised emails than, even if you're writing the same kind of general email, at least, change the first line or so to personalise it to the person. Don't make any assumptions based on political party. We've really found with assisted suicide that people can be all over the political spectrum with it. And this is just a recommendation, but I wouldn't necessarily combine the 2 issues. If you're writing on assisted suicide and on decriminalisation, unless you happen to know that that person is on side on both, I would keep them separate because, as I say, there are many people who are against assisted suicide who are not against abortion. So this is the kind of the practical bit over of these particular pieces of legislation. This is how we fight back in the short term. There's still plenty that we can do on both of these issues, on the abortion decriminalisation and on assisted suicide. To be honest, there wasn't even really time for us to get despondent when we lost those votes in June, as we had to swing right into the next part of the fight. But I think we do need to look beyond the current legislative threats. What do we do to ensure that we aren't just lurching from one crisis to another, but are actually making some progress? In some ways, I'm actually the wrong person to answer that, because working in the kind of political sphere, it does mean that you do just have to respond to things as they come up and be quite reactive. But to say that is to restrict politics just to the realm of what happens in Westminster or in Holyrood or the Senedd. But politics, and certainly political campaigning, go far beyond that. Running branches and events at a local level is political. Writing to the press is political. The everyday conversations that you have to change hearts and minds contribute to the political goal. What happens at Westminster is important. I'm never going to deny that. But we won't change things in Parliament until we change the country as a whole. And that's where I think our focus really has to be. It's at the grassroots level that a difference will really be made. And luckily for you, SPUC is at its heart a grassroots organisation. To move from where we are now to where we want to be, a world where abortion is unthinkable and vulnerable people are cherished and protected, seems like a huge task. But we know that change is possible. The reversal of Roe versus Wade in the States, I have my slide, seemed unthinkable only a few years ago, and Jonathan spoke really well on this yesterday. This is something that just wasn't supposed to be able to happen. If everything is progress, then how did this happen? How did it go back? It went against this entire narrative. And its symbolic significance is perhaps greater than reality. We know that, in fact, some US states responded by making their abortion laws worse. And on one level, it has no relevance to the UK at all, because we don't have a court decision that can be overturned. But it certainly has the relevance of an idea. The other side really took it as a shot across the bows. I think that's partly actually why we've had this trouble with decriminalisation, because they're like, right, the other side are coming for us now. Another example of where change is possible is Poland. Abortion was first introduced there in 1938. And abortion on demand was legalised by the Nazis in 1943 and again by Stalin in 1956. But massive amounts of work done by the people engaged in the pro-life movement changed things, even before the legislation was changed. According to the official statistics, from 1956 onwards, the number of abortions in Poland exceeded 200,000. After John Paul II's first visit to Poland, the number of abortions dropped from 220,000 in 1979 to 137,000 in 1980. 10 years later, in 1990, just a year after Poland gained independence, the number had dropped to 59,000. And the new law severely restricting abortion was successfully introduced in 1993, and it remains one of the most restrictive in Europe. And, this is all stuff that happened, well, maybe not in Ben's lifetime, but in some of our lifetimes, in my lifetime, certainly. Sorry, you're just right in front of me. And we can also take inspiration from other social movements. The recent move away from transgender ideology was in part due to a very determined, very brave movement of women who endured years of demonisation and ostracisation just for making the very mild argument that biological men shouldn't be allowed in women's spaces. I mean, I don't know if you remember it, but even a few years ago, this just had a complete stranglehold over public life. But things have been changing very rapidly. And I hadn't actually thought of the example of pornography until Jonathan mentioned it yesterday, but it's true that there's now a widespread recognition of how harmful it is. And we don't even need to stick to subjects that come under this general banner of sexual revolution. One of my biggest inspirations in this battle is William Wilberforce. Go away and watch the film Amazing Grace. It's a real inspiration for this fight. There was very little that was inevitable about the campaign to abolish the slave trade. It might seem inevitable now, but at the time, slavery had many wealthy and influential supporters who bitterly resisted any change. Before William Wilberforce finally managed to pass his act for the abolition of the slave trade in 1807, anti-slavery bills had been defeated again and again in Parliament. Wilberforce himself first decided to campaign on the issue in 1787, 20 years before that Slave Trade Act was passed. And it would be another 26 years before slavery itself was abolished. And there are other lessons that we can learn from William Wilberforce's campaign. Wilberforce and his allies did not only fight slavery at the political level, they also focused on the cultural, social, and ideological norms that allowed slavery to exist in the first place. The abolitionists turned themselves passionately and primarily to public awareness, cultural causes, and grassroots campaigns. Our work must also be to change the hearts and minds of ordinary people. While SPUC is unashamedly a political lobbying group, we do not restrict our focus to parliamentary politics alone. We also work to effect change in education, media, culture, and grassroots action. And you got to hear about the range of our work yesterday in the panel. So we have staff working across all these areas, but the real change won't come from us, it won't come from the staff, it will come from pro-lifers on the ground. It's ordinary people sharing the pro-life message with their friends and family in the workplace and within their communities who will make the difference. We can only realistically hope that politicians will pay attention to our concern for this appalling loss of human life happening across the country when enough people show solidarity with our cause. And we'll do this by building a grassroots movement that's big enough and strong enough to force cultural and social change. So SPUC is already the biggest grassroots pro-life organisation in the UK. We have a network of almost 60 official SPUC branches and over 16,000 political campaigners across the length and breadth of the country. The variety of our work is unmatched in the pro-life sphere in the UK, and we're engaged in everything from lobbying and political advocacy to shaping creative culture, informing the next generation in the classroom, caring for women in need, and challenging unjust legislation in the courts. But we need to do more. We don't need to convert everyone to our view, just enough to reach that critical mass where whole-scale change is possible. So there are various studies on this, but one study says that when just 10% of the population holds an unshakable belief, that belief will always be adopted by the majority of the society. So whatever that exact percentage is, whether it's 5% or 10% or 15%, we just need to reach that tipping point where abortion becomes unthinkable, as the idea of enslaving fellow human beings is now. SPUC's great strength has always been in its grassroots support. It's this network up and down the country that acts as a pro-life voice in their communities, runs our branches, contacts and engages with MPs and other elected politicians, responds to consultations, writes to the press, delivers leaflets, recruits new members, donates, fundraises, and so much more. That forms our real strength and power. But to see the change that we need to see, to reach that tipping point, we need to grow that network of support. The more people we have in our network carrying out these actions, the greater our influence will be, and the faster we will get to that tipping point. You know, as John said yesterday, we don't want to wait to win. We want to win now. We want to get there. So to get more people carrying out this pro-life work, being a pro-life voice and growing the pro-life movement, we just need more people on our books. We need more people signed up to our communications and our calls to action. So that's why we've launched the Fightback campaign. So the votes in May and June were awful, but they were a wake-up call to many that they need to get involved and fight back. Many people didn't realise just how far those pushing a culture of death were willing to go. You even had prominent feminists, there we go, that's what I wanted, coming out and saying that full abortion decriminalisation was going too far. Janice Turner, writing in The Times, said, "What I fear is that decriminalisation will award the anti-choice lobby a powerful new weapon. Their gruesome posters will no longer bear 10-week fetuses but dead babies. In Britain, unlike the US, abortion is a settled matter. Across the political spectrum, the overwhelming majority support existing laws. Do we want to relitigate abortion at the time when the right is gagging for a culture war?" I mean, obviously, I take no pleasure in the fact that there will be more dead babies from this. But she's right. They've gone too far. They've shown their true colours, and we need to expose it to everyone. And it's not just on abortion that the proponents of death are showing their true colours. So Jonathan mentioned yesterday the former MP Matthew Parris, who's openly written that people might feel coerced into dying, and that would be a good thing. We've seen this video of Lord Brooke, who thinks that abortion and assisted suicide and homosexuality are good because they reduce the population. And a few days ago, a piece was published in the New Statesman called Let Them Die. Literally just called Let Them Die. Do I have some quotes? Yeah. So just some choice quotes from that article. We are living longer, and that means more medical needs and more care needs. Most of the money spent on your healthcare by the state will fall in the final months of your life. Assisted dying would appear to mitigate some of those problems, curbing the pensions bill, the NHS bill, and the care bill. And then, most chillingly, he signs it off, and he's talking about, about older people. All over the country, our elders sit in cell blocks, bathed in the stupefying light and sound of bargain hunt, location, 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 tipping point, unvisited by relatives who are preoccupied by the rhythm of their lives, or perhaps unable to summon the courage to witness the degeneration of the once totemic figures in their lives, their mum and dad. Let them die. So this is someone advocating killing old people because they watch bad television and because their children can't be bothered to visit them, you know? When they tell you it's about suffering or it's about extreme pain or the end of life, I mean, some of them I'm sure are telling the truth, but there are also people like this who think we just need to knock off the elderly to bring down the NHS bill. So let's say they're going too far. They're doing the work for us, you know? So, and to show that this is the case, in the days after the votes, we had a slew of inquiries from people asking how they can get involved. Many more will be having the same thoughts but don't know where to begin. So we need to extend that invitation to join the pro-life movement as widely as possible. Sorry, completely lost my place. So we have at the back, we have the Join the Fightback postcards that people can fill in. Those who send the postcard back to us will receive an action pack containing our current campaigning materials and information on how to get involved across SPUC's range of activities. So this is a very simple way that you can help, is to distribute these postcards as widely as possible. We've got lots here, we've brought lots with us, so I want to see everyone taking a stack away with you. Distribute them at your churches, keep them in your handbags, so that when you have a conversation with somebody who's horrified at these laws going through and wants to get involved, you can give one to them. So many people just need an invitation to get involved. Many people are interested or even passionate about advocating for the unborn, but simply don't know where to start. Another of our great inspirations here that we named the White Flower movement, White Flower Appeal after, is the White Rose movement. And they wrote in one of their pamphlets opposing the Nazis, many, perhaps most of the readers of these leaflets do not see clearly how they can practice an effective opposition. They do not see any avenues open to them. You can show them that avenue by issuing that first invitation to become a member of SPUC and to get involved in our work. So just to conclude, it's easy to see the history of the pro-life movement in this country as one of failure. We've had nearly 60 years of legalised abortion and the numbers keep going up. But again, I keep returning to Jonathan's talk yesterday, but I think the way that he framed it is very helpful. We can take inspiration from those who went before us. And actually, to emphasise the point that all of this legalised abortion is very recent, the founders of SPUC are actually still alive, still with us. That's a picture from a couple of years ago, Alan Smith and Elizabeth Chowdhury Williams. And I believe Alan still serves on the board. One of my favourite quotes I found when researching this last talk, the one on the history of abortion, was from a book that wasn't especially sympathetic to us. And it was talking about the period when the Abortion Act was going through, and the main group proposing abortion was called ALRA. And this is the quote: "One of the major factors focusing public attention on abortion was the formation of SPUC in 1967, a political body set up to oppose ALRA. ALRA and SPUC, each small but intensely dedicated, fought each other in the press, radio, television, and in public meetings up and down the country. Books, pamphlets, and letters were showered upon members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and the public was treated to the spectacle of learned professors demonstrating bottled fetuses at public meetings, playing tape-recorded fetal heartbeats, or discussing the pain felt by the unborn fetus at its termination. The emotional level ran high." So I'm not necessarily advocating using bottled fetuses, but we do need to rediscover that spirit. We have a proud history, a history of being the major player in this debate. We've always been here, we've never given up, we've never gone away, and there's a great deal we can be proud of. But if it ever were the case, as Janice Turner said, that there was a settled consensus on abortion in this country, the other side have broken it. We need to stop half internalising this idea that we're the extreme ones, just because we don't think babies should be killed or that sick people should be killed. They are the extreme ones. They're showing it for the world to see. This is the very last time that we should be giving up. The fight back starts now. Thank you.